down to Mogollon, New Mexico, and it was a gold mine, and the town is still there, and it was in a valley with just enough room for a road down the middle of it, and houses along the street, and I remember everyone had their toilets on the hillside with paths, leading up to them. I remember going to the mine, and maybe the reason why I remember this so much is because we've got a picture of my sister and I in the buckets that they, on a burro, that they were carrying ore out of the mine. Next door, or very close to us, there was a woman by the name of Salisbury, and she had a big fence around her house, and a tall fence, and you couldn't see except the cracks or something. And she took a liking to Doris and I think she was a single, maiden woman. And she gave us some china, pretty little china cocoa cups and little or little pudding dishes and saucers. Beautiful. They must have been made in China or Japan. Dragons on them, and Mother baked then. She baked bread and sold it there. Maybe cakes too, but I can remember smelling the baking. Then from there, I remember traveling with Uncle Marley. We were in a covered, it was a truck, probably a Model T truck with a bed that was covered like a covered wagon. Anyway, it was covered with canvas, and I can remember riding in the back of that old Model T truck with on bedding and looking out at the mountain as we wound around coming up out of Mogollon. And it's then from there we went to California, I believe.
And then when we went to Tracy, and we walked to school, and Dad always believed in putting us boys out where we had chores to do. So we had rabbits, we had pigs, and of course we always had chickens. But commercially, I don't recall. I think you had the rabbits, didn't you, Chuck? And I had to slop the pigs. And just about once a week we were out skinning rabbits and take them down to Safeway there in Tracy and selling them.
Yeah, I remember from then on, and the reason why I know that all of these things happened that I'm talking about happened before I started to school. Because I started school in Tracy, California, and in the old Negley School that was right beside the old San Joaquin River.
And Dad was a great homebrew man. He loved his homebrew, and he did a good job of making it, I guess, because everybody liked it. And at the time that he would make homebrew, Mother would make us a root beer. And the homebrew, it would go behind the stove to I guess it has to go through a process of fermenting.
Yeah.
Once in a while, the fermentation it resulted in popping the cork or popping the lid, hitting the ceiling. And so we grew up though with Dad making homebrew, Mom making root beer. We enjoyed it.
He was working on the Hetchy Hetchy piping project, piping the water from the Sierras to the Bay Area. actually, they tunneled it. And Daddy was good at timbering, and he got that. And Uncle Tom and Uncle Marley was on the job too. That's where I went to church in Stockton. In fact, that's the first attendance in church that I remember. And it was upstairs, over stores. It was just a not too big a room, it didn't seem like, and wooden floors, and the steps went up. They were kind of narrow, and they made a bend, a landing, and then change directions. And Doris and I can remember that the only thing I remember real good about it was that we sang Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam, a duet when we were little. But we would go, it was strange, church was always Sunday school was at 10 o'clock in the morning, and church was at 7 at night. And so we would go to Sunday school. It was about 40 miles north. But we would take a picnic lunch, and after Sunday school we'd go to the park, and we would eat, and we'd lay around and play and wait for church that night if we stayed for church. And then I was baptized when in the old San Joaquin River in 30, must have been 34. This was when I was 8 years old. We used to go to Stockton to go to a movie once in a great while, and some of them were these still movies, where there was, they were black and white and very different than they are now. Mother would make us take a nap before we could go to the movie, and I always got a sick headache. And even now, quite often I'll get a headache, but I don't go to movies anymore. He worked there for 4 years, and then prior to that time, Uncle Tom went south to Arkansas, and he was Daddy sent him money to buy a farm. He sent him quite a bit, and Uncle Tom had talked Daddy into. This was during the Depression. It was pretty bad, and Uncle Tom had decided that he could buy some land cheap down there, and Daddy and he could farm, and they'd make a good living. They'd be self-sufficient. Well, after Uncle Tom got down there, the Depression was terrible in the South, and he had spent the money to live on, and he just had a rented farm. We left. I celebrated turned 9 in Phoenix. The day we went through Phoenix, was my birthday, and that was in 30. That would have been 33, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And I can remember it. I had never been anywhere where it was so hot as it was when we went through Death Valley and down to Phoenix.
We loaded up, and the trailer that Dad had, he always loaded Mom's washing machine on the back, and he always had his anvil, and he always had his forge. And we would stop periodically when we would cross a stream or something, and Mom would do the washing. There we went on to Arkansas. In Arkansas, I don't know exactly what reaction Dad and Mom had. I know us kids were happy to get out of the car, but he had a house, and this was 1x12s, standing on end. It had a floor in it, but they were standing on end, and 1x4s covering the cracks. No insulation of any kind, and had a fireplace between the two. I'll call it a duplex, because they lived in half of the house, we lived in the other half.
And each had a front door or entrance, yeah.
There were two large rooms with the fireplace between them. And Uncle Tom lived in one side and we lived in the other. And on the back of the main, these two main rooms, there was a lean-to. One small lean-to bedroom on our side, and part of the lean-to Mother used as a kitchen when she got a stove. For quite some time, Mother cooked on the fireplace. All of our beds were in this one large room, except Mom and Daddy had the lean-to. It was beautiful country, wooded, a huge lake. We went to Lake Village. We were just a few miles out of Lake Village, and in front of us, right the other side of the road, was this large lake. It must have been about 10 miles long and a mile wide. And not too far from the Mississippi.
I know several times at night we would row across Lake Chico. Lake Chico was a bend of the Mississippi River, and as it hairpinned out, the engineers cut through and isolated Lake Village from the Mississippi River and created what we call Lake Chico.
The place that we lived in, the house we lived in, was a square logged was a hewed log house, as I remember. No glass in the windows, just shutters. We had to sleep under mosquito nets, and mosquitoes were bad. There were a lot of we had a big cotton-mouth moccasin or water moccasin in the garden, so I didn't have to go out and gather vegetables. I was scared of the snake. The woods were thick and not too far from the house, and we didn't dare go out in the woods because you could get lost awfully easy. The part that I remember the most, it was so hot that Mother would even wet the sheets, wring them out in water to cool, because it was almost too hot to go to sleep or stay asleep. While we were there was a cyclone, and I call it a cyclone because that's what I remember them saying it was. There were people killed, and houses blown, roofs blown off, and Mother and Dad sent us kids to the storm cellar. It was kind of a community storm cellar. There were quite a few families went there for shelter. They were trying to get the windows barred and things put up, preparatory to the storm. And it just lifted the shingles, and the water came in under the shingles and wet our bedding, and the folks, by the time they were ready to come to the storm cellar, the storm was over. And I remember the peanuts, harvesting the peanuts, digging them, and they tasted awful, raw peanuts. I'd never tasted them before. While we were there, it was almost impossible to get a job, to make a living. And Daddy would would work for 50 cents a day, chopping cotton or whatever they did on the farms. I remember that they hired our family, to go out and pick cotton. And we had these long sacks. You got a penny a pound. And you know how much cotton it takes to get a pound? I made either 6 or 8 cents in a half day.
Also, Dad made a friend, one of our neighbors that was back in the edge of the woods, was a bootlegger, Ed Matthews. Ed Matthews found a willing partner in my dad. Dad bought the necessary ingredients, and Mr. Matthews, he provided the know-how and made the whiskey.
He had the still.
He had the still, and he would hide this still back in the woods in the middle of blackberry thickets and things like that. And Dad would buy the malt or whatever ingredients were necessary. We'd swipe the corn at night to make the corn whiskey. And Mr. Matthews, when we'd run off a batch, we always went out when he ran it off. We didn't need to, but we did because this was different. The mash, he would dump out of the barrels and around the still. The wild hogs would come, eat the mash, get drunk, run into trees. We just enjoyed it very much.
We went to school for a short time. They didn't sing the national anthem. They didn't salute the flag or Pledge of Allegiance. They sang Dixie for an opening, the first when we went to school. That was the way the school day started, was singing Dixie. It seems like my teacher's name was Mrs. Starr, but I had her such a short time that I don't remember. And then we moved down to Louisiana, and Daddy was fishing down there in the lakes and the bayous.
And that fall, of necessity, old Dad took what money he had left and purchased commercial fishing gear. Trammel nets, gill nets, seines, trot lines, snag lines. Whatever. That's about the size of it, wasn't it?
In a boat. Or where did
No,
he get his boat?
we made the boat.
Oh.
We went down to the Singer Game Reserve on the Kennesaw River
That's it. the
in northern
Yeah.
Louisiana. It's across the river from Vicksburg, was it? And Dad started commercial fishing, and we'd walk back into these lakes. We caught we called them spoon-billed catfish. I think they call them paddlefish now. They were catfish in our opinion because they were skin fish and no
bones.
well, no bone, but no scales. The spoonbill was our best seller, and then the regular catfish, blue cats, what others? There were several.
Yellow cats.
Yellow cat. They'd get pretty good sized. And our market was over in Vicksburg. And Dad took out the back seat and the back rest on this Model A Ford, and then put a box in there, and that's where we would carry the fish.
And lots of squirrels. In fact, for a time, that was one of the main dishes that we had was squirrel, and actually cornmeal was our main menu. We had corn meal pancakes for breakfast, cornbread for lunch, and at night we'd have cornmeal mush. we had fish occasionally. We would go to the bayous and catch these little sun perch, and they were good. They were easy to catch too. And then we had dandelion greens. If Daddy was lucky enough to get a wild boar, and then once in a while we'd have deer, venison. We had frog legs. They had huge bullfrogs out there. Daddy would catch them with these, put his hat over them or catch them with his hand. The reason why I remember that is because one time he went, this here head was sticking up out of a puddle, and he thought it was a frog, and he went to grab it with his hand, and it was a water moccasin with its head sticking out. They tasted a lot like chicken, maybe even better. And then we said we just wouldn't eat frog legs, and Mother cooked, fried them, just like she did the squirrel, and put them on the same plate. We didn't know that they were mixed with the others, and we commented about how good that squirrel was. The chickens run loose, and they'd hide their nests in the hay and in the loft and things, and so we would go hunt for eggs, and Mrs. Jefferson, by gathering the eggs, she would give us all the eggs we wanted, and they had lots of cows, and they gave us milk. And we couldn't go to school in Louisiana. That's where Dick was born, in Tallulah or something like that. Let me tell you a little bit about what the place looked like where you were born.
Okay.
It was in a beautiful open place with forest all around, or nearly all around. There was a little river. I thought it was the Arkansas.
It's an unusual name.
And it was a beautiful, sparkling brook-like river. It was a very small river, clear. And this house was a little 2-room house. Well, actually, it was 3 rooms, but one was a lean-to, and it got to leaning so far that Doris and I learned to skate by going up to the top and just gliding down after we shoveled out all of the goats had used it for a barn. The place, if it had been painted, all the paint was gone.
And this was in Louisiana there, too.
In Louisiana. But we thought you were something else when you were born. You were there 3 months. We were there 3 months.
And Dad was trying to stay alive with fishing, commercial fishing.
And I have no idea whether he made any money, but we did live.
We starved out. Usually the lakes would replenish themselves during high water. This was a year when the Mississippi did not create high waters. So as a result, the lakes were fished out. We were covered with boils. Dick was born. We didn't have clothes. So we headed for Shreveport. And there Uncle Ed felt sorry for us. They bought some little dresses for Doris and Dorothy. They bought Chuck and I some overalls to cover our bare bottoms. Mom had boils, and one of them was right in the fold of her elbow. And she had to carry Dick because he was just a little taut. And someplace, somewhere, our dad had won a beautiful revolver with ivory handles and then jewels set in them. I don't think the jewels were real, but they could have been. And I know he had to trade that for gas and cash to get from up in the Kennesaw Valley to Shreveport. And it It was from Shreveport then. We came back to the junction. This is in 1934.